So for the understitching for our pencil skirt, we've already attached our facing to our waistband of our skirt, and I went along and used the overlocker on this edge all the way around. And so now we're going to understitch. So remember, this isn't listed in the actual directions, but it really is not going to lay right without it. And that's like one of those things we talked about when we first learned about understitching. So now that we have our edges finished, what we're going to do is lay this out, and the facing is away. And so like we have our facing here on this side on my right hand, the body of the skirt or whatever the garment is in the left, and we're going to be taking all of this seam allowance and we're going to be sewing it down to the facing as close as we can to our permanent seam line. Okay, so and we're doing that at 12 SPI, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. And remember, you'll want to focus on just a little bit at a time. And so when we're doing that understitching, I'm taking my permanent stitch and I'm lining it up with the inside left portion of my presser foot. So it is right here, and my needle is going to be right next to that. And let me zoom in so you can kind of see. So once again, you can see here's my permanent stitch line, and it's right here touching this inside portion of my presser foot, okay? And so we're just getting these 3 layers, both sides of the seam allowance, that are now bound together with a closed overlock to the facing so that it will not roll to the other side. And once again at 12 SPI. Back stitch, and then we just go nice and slow, and then as you need, you can readjust and make sure that this is laying flat and you have it fully together. Let's see, for this next little portion. So once again, we have body of our skirt, facing, and then the seam allowance is going towards here, and then right here is my permanent stitch line. Going nice and slow at 12 SPI with that permanent stitch line touching the inside left of my presser foot, and just making sure this is laying nice and flat as we go. And when you need to, kind of readjust this next little segment, making sure that's pulled nice and flat, holding it with tension in our hands. And just doing that stitch really nice and close to our permanent seam line. And anytime there's bulk, like this seam allowance right here for the side seam, you always want to go a little slower to make sure it works itself all the way through. And so I'm making sure with my right hand, I'm pulling and I'm adding some tension to make sure it's laying flat. And I'm really getting that nice and open. Because why we do that understitching is so we are trying to get it to essentially have that too much tension so it rolls to the other side, because it's going to want to roll towards the outside. And so we're essentially trying to overcorrect it so it stays neutral by having that tension come from the back, balancing it out. And since we want this to stay, that's why we do the 12 SPI, and we backstitch at the beginning and at the end. So this one, if you notice, a lot of it is, since it's not as harsh of a curve on a collar, or as like you did in your curve seam where we first learned understitching in the sample book, you're not having to fight with it as much because it's not as harsh of a curve, and most of it kind of around the side seams is where that harsher curve is, and that's where you're gonna be getting more resistance from the garment. But you'll just kind of go nice and slow around those and make sure that we get those. And then we backstitch. And so now that we've done our understitching, I can trim my threads, and then I can go and I can press this waistband just how we want it, nice and flat. So, if you notice on the inside, we can see that stitching line, and that's what we want. Because now, zoom out and so you can kind of see this. When we go, we turn this the right side out. Let me give it a little zip. It's already more willing to lay flat the way you want it. Like so. And so after we press that, it's gonna stay like that, really nice and crisp. So I'm gonna go press this with some steam, and while I'm over there, I'll also press in the line for my hem, and then we'll be back for the hem, and then we just have one more thing, or two more things after that.